We are joined now by Mississippi State Senator Brice Wiggins, represents Jackson County, District 52, down on the coast. Good morning, Senator Wiggins.
Hey, Richard. How you doing? I apologize. I've got a little cold going on, so if I sound like I'm actually on the radio, so that's what's going on.
Well, 'tis the season, right? I know it's probably a little warmer where you are than it is in North Mississippi, but with the changing weather, kind of goes along with that time of year. Hope you feel better in a hurry.
Well, thank you. I don't know. It's pretty cold down here on the coast, so we're used to the warm breezes, and that ain't happening this morning. But we can deal with it.
Well, hang in there. We're going to feel sorry for you when it's 68 down there this afternoon, and the sun shines out over everybody. Let's jump into this coming session. It's crazy how close it is. We're 21 days for Christmas, and that means we're a month away from you and your colleagues reconvening in Jackson for a new year. I'm curious about youth court. I know that's something that is very much on your mind. That is going to be a topic that we're dealing with. Where are we on youth court? Are we looking at expansion? Is there reform that is needed? Let's just start there.
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing it up, and reform is needed, and I would point the listeners to some articles that are out there. And what happened is we, meaning the legislature and the Judiciary Committees, commissioned a task force, and that task force reported to us, to the Judiciary A Committee in the Senate, which I chair, and did that a couple weeks ago. The bottom line was, as suspected, we had serious issues in our youth court system, not from personnel not doing their job or anything like that. It's a systemic issue, and they called on to get our children to the point where they're being served correctly by the state. They called on having youth court judges, full-time youth court judges statewide. And we can go into the kind of how things are structured now, but there are other issues they brought up, and there's some serious reforms we need to do, and that's what we're looking at.
Senator Wiggins is chair of Senate Judiciary Committee A. Just wanted to mention that as he looks at this issue and the committee continues to look at this issue. Senator, we know the importance of the Supreme Court. We know the importance of the appellate courts across the state of Mississippi and chancery courts. I think I could make an argument that getting youth court right is as important as any part of our court system, because it kind of sets the foundation going forward for youth who have gotten themselves into situations that maybe they shouldn't be in. How do we... You talked about reforms that are needed and it being a systemic issue. Take us a little deeper on that.
Yeah, 100%. And just for your listeners' sake, and most people don't know, our youth courts are a court system that are set up to address two big categories: delinquencies, which are children who have committed crimes, and then neglect and abuse cases. And, Richard, I'm telling you, if you want to see some just heartbreaking cases, you go into a youth court and you see these delinquent cases. And I've said this, these children are not there because of them. They're there because of their caretakers. Their parents have failed them in some form or fashion. And so, to your point, the youth court is the first and best place to correct those issues before they become adults. Because the bottom line is, once you become 17 years old and you commit a felony, you're in the adult system.
Right.
And at that point, it's too late. And I've been both a youth court prosecutor and I've been an assistant district attorney. I put murderers in jail. I put sex offenders in jail. We need to get them at the start. And people will tell you, if you're talking about being fiscally conservative, fiscally responsible, you ought to put more money on the front end, because that saves you problems on the back end. And it is a little frustrating to me, and I've said this in our committee meeting, we as a state and as a legislature have not paid attention. We have not done what we needed to do over the decades to get our system correct. And yes, we have issues with crime and all that, but the people that are doing the crime in the adult system, they've started out in the youth court system, generally speaking.
Right.
And so we've got to get that right. And what we are finding out through this recommendation and the report and all that is that it's really the resources. A lot of it is based on the counties, and they have to do it. Well, the counties don't have all the resources, and the state needs to step up and do this. And so that's what we're looking at. And we had 3 judges testify before the committee, and they went over all that. So, yes, it is. If you're looking to be fiscally responsible, that's where you want to put your money.
So,
and there's other things besides money, but that's a good way to explain it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels like it always comes back to money. It doesn't really seem to matter what issue we're talking about. It's, okay, are the resources in place, and how do you allocate those responsibly to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck across kind of all of the systems, all of the agencies, all of the responsibilities that we have as a state. So if you don't mind, kind of unpack some of the solutions that are in that report beyond just, okay, we need to throw money at the problem. What's the practical application here for how the youth court system in Mississippi runs more efficiently and maybe more effectively?
Yeah, so there's 2 big things. One is the structure, and one is the intake. And so for those that don't understand, the structure outside of your big county, let's just say your big counties, like I'm in Jackson County, down Harrison County, we have a full-time youth court system. It's like any other court system that you get into your smaller rural counties, and it's what's called a referee system, meaning it's an attorney who's a part-time person working part-time to address these factors. And that's the majority of in the state. And what the report came out and said was it is not doing the job that you want in your full-time, like you have in your full-time areas, because the attention's not being paid, you don't have the resources, things like that. So one of the solutions is what they recommended is full-time youth court judges in a regional system. And you saw this last year. Governor Reeves acknowledged this because in his executive budget last year, and I understand that he's going to put this in his budget this year, was to add what are called chancellors to serve as specifically as youth court judges. He did this last year, and we worked on that. There was some pushback. We've heard this report now, and so we're looking at it. I fully expect the governor to come out with a version of that to try to get the structure in place. The other big issue is what's called intake, and what we have surprisingly found out is that intake is the first line where the children are brought into the system, be it a delinquent child or an abused child. And that intake officer is what they're called, is supposed to do an analysis and make recommendations and do that. Well, what we've found out is that those intake officers aren't being given the training that they need. Number 2, you got some folks who are not even trained as intake officers, who are another employee through another government agency serving as intake officers. That's just not going to work. And I will be filing legislation on that particular issue as a standalone issue. And so and that goes to the systemic issues that we've had. We have neglected the youth court system so that when the kids are getting out of it, they're not being handled correctly. And again, it's not the people; it's we have to pay attention. And yes, people know about the chancery courts and circuit courts, not so much the youth courts, and that's why we need to address this.
You got time to hang on for
big recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there's a lot there. Have you got time to hang for one more segment?
Yes, please.
Good deal. We'll continue the conversation with Senator Brice Wiggins. He represents Jackson County, Pascagoula, Ocean Springs, and more. District 52 on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Take a quick time out. We've got more with you on the Gallo Radio Show right here on SuperTalk Mississippi. Welcome again to the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. Glad to be with you on this Wednesday morning, middle of the week. And Senator Brice Wiggins says it's even cold on the coast this morning. December the 4th, we are glad to be with you. Continuing our conversation with Senator Brice Wiggins, who represents District 52. That's Jackson County on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, or coastal Mississippi, as some refer to it. Senator Wiggins, certainly appreciate your time and continuing the conversation. We've got a couple of messages on the C Spire text line, questions for you that we'll get to in just a second. But before we do, I'm curious, as you talk about the reforms and the recommendations in the report on the youth court system, we know that you got committees and you got the Senate and you've got the House, and everybody's got to be on the same page to actually get legislation passed. What is the appetite with the Senate in particular, but maybe the Senate and the House, the legislature as a whole, to get some of these reforms in place to allow the youth court system in Mississippi to operate in a more efficient way?
Yeah, so I've heard through the grapevine that the House has chosen to not want to take this up this year, which is a shame. But I don't, I just think they need to, the leadership, and I'm meeting with the chairman over there, and we'll talk about it. But I might remind everybody that the governor put it in his budget last year, and we tried to do this. It's an issue that the governor knows needs to be done.
Why would the House not be interested in taking this up?
That's a good question. I will say, and really to be upfront about that, is we have a lot on our plate. We have the judicial redistricting that has to be done this year, and that is redistricting of our circuit and chancery courts. We attempted that last year. It passed the Senate. The House didn't, for various reasons, didn't take it up. We have to get that done, and that is the Mississippi Constitution requires our court systems to be redistricted every 10 years. And when I say redistrict, it's like the legislature, because it's a representative form of government, obviously. And so we have spent a lot of time working on that last year, both the House and the Senate, and my colleagues, Chairman Horan in the House, and Chairman Hood in the House, we worked on it, and we just couldn't get it there. And so that is on our agenda this year. And so that may be one of the reasons. And I know we have tax reform that we're looking at. I'm not saying this is a small issue, but we have to start somewhere to get this done on the youth court side. So if there's I just think that there's a lot on the plate, but it comes down to our children, and there's no more precious commodity, and it's not even a commodity. There's no more precious person in our state than the children, and these children are, for various reasons, in the youth court system, and we owe it to them to try to fix these things.
So a message that we got on the C Spire text line, and if you want to join us, you can do so at 601-879-4395, said that Senator Wiggins said, and I don't know if this is a direct quote or indirect, if you go into a youth court, you can see some of the problems that are in place. This person says, though, I'm actually not able to go into youth court. Those are closed to the public, the court, the social workers from CPS, youth court prosecutors. Those are the only ones that are allowed in, and that this is something that needs to be reformed. Do you agree with that youth court should be a more open and transparent process, or because of privacy and protection issues, it doesn't need to be more open?
Your caller is very perceptive. I will say, my personal feeling is yes, and I have been a prosecutor. I represent clients. I have in the past. The confidentiality, and it's a very, very broad confidentiality, I think has created some of the issues that we have. And my personal feeling is we can do better, and it needs to be a more transparent process. I think that's also why the governor put forward his proposal last year that we worked on in the Senate. It needs to be reformed. Now, there are reasons for confidentiality, and much of it is that these are children, and you don't want what they did when they were 11 to come haunt them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Assuming that they have straightened things out. I mean, that's if nothing else, fairness. But the confidentiality that's there, that exists now, has led to a lot of the problems. Yes.
Yeah, and I guess
would agree with that.
So when we're talking about youth court punishments, a lot of times, if those go the way they're supposed to go, they end up being expunged from a child's record, and that doesn't necessarily follow them for the rest of their life. If you open it up, while it could still be expunged from the record, people would know, people would see, there would be a history there, right? Is that kind of what we're talking about?
No, not that part of it. I think what your caller was getting at was it's and Richard, you can imagine when a light doesn't shine, it can lead to an abuse of processes.
Sure.
And I think that's what they're talking about. No, the whole goal is to allow a child who goes through it in a delinquency case to be able to proceed with their life, and they get it behind them. I think it's more about what they're talking about is about how it gets used. And I'll give you an issue that's come up in the last couple years is in order to get records that involve a youth matter, you have to go through the youth court and file a particular motion. And we had to pass a bill a couple years ago because there was friction between a district attorney's office and a youth court, and the youth court would not turn over the records to the district attorney's office, and the district attorney's office was trying to prosecute a felony case.
Oh, wow.
And the youth court would not do it. And that's part of the issues that we have to get addressed, and we're continuing to work on it, and I think that's what your caller was alluding to. But as far as keeping them the confidentiality and so that they can move on with their life, that would remain, yes.
Yeah. Visiting with Senator Brice Wiggins. We'll switch gears just for a moment as we wrap things up. Got a couple of minutes left. The way committees work, you're obviously very, very focused on issues that come before your committee, but that doesn't preclude you from being a senator that deals with all of the other issues that are coming before the Senate or the House as well. You mentioned a second ago tax reform. That's something that is very much going to be a topic this year. We know that the House and the Senate, or at least the leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor's office, do not appear to be on the same page. I've said over and over, I'm not convinced that the House and the Senate, especially the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor, are as far apart as it may appear. What's your take on that as we get close to the start of this new session?
If I'm putting my finger up and judging the wind right now, I would agree with you.
Okay.
But we all know that when the session starts and things happen, it can go either way. Let me put it this way. I know one thing that it seems like everybody's agreed upon, and I personally have come out and said I'm in favor of it, is reducing or eliminating the grocery tax. I think if you're looking for low-hanging fruit, that's it. As far as the income tax, yeah, there is a difference of opinion. And by the way, everybody agrees we need to do some kind of tax reduction or elimination. It's to what extent is that going to be, and what are the effects of it? The one thing that always gets brought up is Kansas, that had a Republican legislature went across the board, and they went into a recession. And then they had to come back, and then they had to pass tax increases on their citizens.
Yeah,
I know from the Senate side, we don't want to do that. So I think on the tax issue, people want to do it, and it's just what's it going to look like. One of the other bigger issues.
So it's got to be incremental, right? I mean, it's not a wipe it off the board all in one fell swoop. Well,
if you read comments in the various media outlets, some people want to do that. And that, from what I understand, that's what Kansas did, and they went into a recession.
Yeah.
And we have incrementally reduced the income tax going back to when Governor Reeves was the lieutenant governor. So we have done that, and guess what? We're in the best financial shape we've ever had. So I think the history shows that. One of the other big issues that is overarching, certainly from the Senate side, and the House was there last year, was PERS. I said
got 20 seconds, Senator.
Okay, my daughter's a teacher, or she's going into teaching. When she gets ready to retire, there will not be a retirement for her when she gets ready to retire. Okay, that's how it is. And we have got to get PERS under control before, so that we can deal with all these others too, because PERS is the big elephant in the room that is dealing with. And the House passed legislation, and we did some things last year, but I think that's going to have to be addressed as well.
We'll pick this conversation up down the line. Thank you, Senator.